So last week we talked about Dr. Gottman's research on the 4 communication styles that are proven to destroy almost 90% of all marriages and most relationships. But this week we're going to focus on many of the principles that I learned from Dr. Gottman's book called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And to make it easier to remember, I took these principles and I narrowed it into 3 categories. One is honoring, the other is knowing, and then finally, trusting commitment. Now, whether or not you're married, these principles are going to help you enhance all your relationships. Plus, it's better to learn this now than have to master it when you're married. So I laugh because I've been trying some of these techniques of the book on Nason, and she looked at me once and she said, "What are you doing?" She knew it was not common for me to use the mirroring technique where you repeat back whatever your spouse is saying, but try to match that emotion. So I will tell you that these principles work, but if you start working them with your spouse, they're going to say, "What are you doing? This is not who you normally are." And that's all right. But the first foundational principle is this: honor your spouse. And it begins by looking at what is the opposite of honoring your spouse. That's betrayal. And behind every failed marriage and every failed relationship is betrayal. And it's when you don't honor God or your spouse as being the highest priority. But through honor, you're able to support each other's God-given hopes and dreams and purposes in life together. And one of the most surprising truths about my marriage and about your marriage and most marriages out there is that marital arguments, well, most of them are unsolvable because they're deeply rooted inside of us. And these fundamental differences on how God designed each one of us to be. And to fight against those differences, well, it's to fight against God himself. It's like saying, "I don't like how God made you." And that's not the attitude we need to have. The two of you are uniquely designed by God for a reason, for a season, to fulfill God's will in your marriage. And fighting over those differences, all they do is harm your marriage and harm your God-given mission. And so knowing what those differences are that cause the conflict within your marriage and learning how to honor and respect those differences and seek the meaning and purpose in those differences is how you create a map that helps guide you towards the destiny that God has for you. Now, these long-simmering, negative, dishonoring, unresolved thoughts, if you have those inside of you toward your spouse, well, they poison your relationships. Not only current situation, but their future and your past can easily be destroyed because negative views often distort the past memories and even distorts your present perception. As Jesus said, if your eye is bad, meaning your perspective, then your whole body will be filled with darkness. That's Matthew 6:23 ESV. Research shows that 94% of the time, if you have a positive spin on your marriage and on your spouse's character, then the results will be a positive marriage and a positive feeling towards the future, past and present. So it's so vital, my friends, to just cast out all those negative thoughts and bring in positive thoughts about your spouse and about the things that you admire the most about your spouse. That's why we see the Bible, that there's this teaching, this principle that whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy, think about those things. And whatever you've learned, put into practice. And then the God of peace will be with you. See, guys, the strongest marriages share a deep sense of meaning and connection. And when a conflict happens, instead of turning away from each other or turning on each other in a negative way, they turn towards each other to solve the challenges or just to comfort each other. Dr. Gottman's research shows that most men will distance themselves from marital conflict. As a result, 80% of the time, it's the women that have to initiate the marital issue discussion with their husband. And unfortunately, it usually begins in anger because their low-level complaints or their irritability was ignored by their spouse. In other words, their husband wasn't attuned to their feelings. And as a result, most couples, they'll naturally turn away from each other instead of turning to each other to address the conflict. And they'll say things like, well, he's not going to change, so I might as well not even say anything. I'm just going to be mad at him. Or the husband will say the same thing. But the key is tuning in to each other to avoid these harsh startups. And regardless of the difficulty of the subject, we must be willing to believe that there'll be a positive reaction, a for you, not against you type of attitude. And if your spouse is upset with you or upset about anything, ask them, I'm here for you. I'm here. I'm listening with a listening empathy. I'm here for you. Do you want my advice or solutions also? And if your spouse says, I'm only looking for empathy, I'm only looking for you to listen, then genuinely listen and communicate your understanding. Let your spouse know what you're hearing so that that there's no confusion, and help your spouse know that you're on your spouse's side, regardless on how unreasonable your spouse is being. You got to communicate, I'm on your side. And by all means, do not give any advice or solutions if your spouse asks you not to. Remember, in all cases, logic and the Holy Spirit usually only moves in and takes over control once overwhelming emotions and feelings move out. Remember, never ever take those initial feelings that are communicated to you personally, because the beginning is usually about getting the junk out so that truth can move in. And husbands, especially before you ever let those feelings out on your spouse, remember, most of your feelings are only for God to hear. As taught in Ephesians 4:29 and 5 verses 25 through 26, the principle is, husbands, only say what builds your wife up according to your wife's needs, and wash your wife with the words that God gives you. See, the strongest marriage usually shares a deep sense of meaning and commitment. They not only get along, but they also work together to support each other's hopes, aspirations, and build a sense of purpose as they work this life together. And the key is to let your spouse and your spouse's desires influence you and your decision making. If your spouse doesn't feel like you're taking his or her input, this causes your spouse to feel dishonored. And what it means to truly honor and respect your spouse is to hear your spouse's desires and wholeheartedly know each other's likes and dislikes, wants and needs, and future hopes and dreams. If you know these things, you can navigate daily and future decisions for your marriage. And Dr. Gottman calls this love maps. And you can find many of these love maps in his app called Gottman Card Decks app. And it's downloadable for Android or iPhone. But your goal is to put to memory even the most minor details about your spouse. Like, that she likes coffee with whipped cream, with lots and lots of coconut sugar on top. Little things like that communicates to your spouse that you love them and that you know them. So honor, know them, and know this, that as often as life changes, our love maps change too. Even a woman's cycle can cause, due to hormone changes, an influence on her dislikes and her likes. So staying curious, asking questions is another way of continuing to learn about your spouse and is a key to a successful marriage. Another part of knowing your spouse is knowing your spouse's past. And then also knowing your spouse's future hopes and dreams, because it helps define who your spouse is. So ask questions like, what is a significant triumph in your life that made you who you are? What did you see when you observed your parents handling emotions like anger, sadness, pride, fear, affection? How did that impact how you handle it? What mission and legacy do you want to leave behind when you die? Who do you want to become? Love mapping is all about intimately knowing each other's likes, dislikes, personal quirks, hopes, dreams. And it's not about completely understanding your spouse. You're never going to completely understand your spouse because she's uniquely designed. Or if you're female, he's uniquely designed, even down to the thumbprint. But what you can understand is that core emotional level, because we all have similar feelings. We may not understand the person, but we can understand the emotion. And that's called connection and attunement. And when you get in tune with your spouse's emotions, you're able to navigate better in your communication. It's what Romans 12, verses 15 through 16 NIV teaches: rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, live in harmony with each other. Hear that? Harmony. It's like attunement. And don't be proud. Don't be proud. And it's so difficult because, especially as men, I don't know if you guys have this challenge, but I do. And Nisa is we talked about, I need her help to help me navigate. I'm fearful of anger. I'm fearful of negative feelings being expressed through me. I need to learn how to express them, because people judge the sincerity of your voice. If your voice and your nonverbals are not in alignment, then they don't necessarily believe what you're saying. And my wife's called me out on it at times. And it's like, my heart was sincere, my mind was sincere, my intent was sincere, but my body just wouldn't go there. And there are times where I've even had to tell people, on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being rage. Right now I'm at number 5, but I'm, out of respect, I'm not letting you see it. The reality is I have a hard time expressing it. So learning how people love, regardless whether you understand how they got there, is so important. Donald, my mentor, said to me, who's on this message, you don't have to figure your wife out. You don't have to figure her out, Dustin. You got to stop trying to figure her out. What you need to know is, what does her heart need in that moment? And genuinely be there for her, regardless whether you understand the why behind what she's feeling. It's so difficult for me. I'm so analytical and so studying. Even while we're having the argument, I'm studying, trying to figure out how I can do this better. And she just needs me to be there. And it's just difficult, you guys. But even when I don't understand, this final category is what helps us navigate, and it's called trusting commitment. So the first part was honor, second part, no, and finally trusting commitment. You've heard me say this, and you're going to hear me say it 1,000 times again until it sinks into your heart. Regardless of life circumstances, your spouse needs to hear verbally and non-verbally and physically that you are for her, not against her, that the fullness of your favor and grace rest upon her. This trusting commitment protects your heart, your mind, and ultimately your marriage. Because there are times when you don't feel like honoring your spouse and you don't understand your spouse. Instead of thinking your spouse is crazy or your spouse doesn't understand you, know this: filter every thought through this trusting commitment thought filter. Favor and forgiveness for you, not against you. If you don't do this, I promise you, the enemy of your marriage will always have a foothold in your marriage. And remember this: not every problem is solvable, because some issues are based on your dislikes about how God made your spouse. And trying to change your spouse to be something that they're not dishonors God and dishonors your spouse. So identify what is solvable and work on what's solvable. And use phrases like this. I feel, and then you put in the feeling, blamed, insulted, criticized, unappreciated. Can you rephrase that? So meaning if they come across with a harsh beginning, say, I hear what you're saying, but I also feel insulted by how you said it. Can you re-say it for me? Can you rephrase it so that I don't feel that way? It's important because if you don't communicate how you feel, if you don't communicate that what they said hurt, then many times they just feel like you don't care. Especially if they know they said something that was really not right and that it should rouse you up. And then there are times you're going to need to calm down. And so you say phrases like, can you let me start all over? Can you tell me you're for me, not against me? Can you just love me right now? Can you show that you love me? Hold me. Help me calm down right now. Please be more gentler and quiet and help so I can calm down. Or if you have to, let's take a break. I'm starting to feel flooded. And if I feel flooded, I cannot hear you. And I want to hear you. And ultimately, if you're able to hear, then it's the sorry, please forgive me type of phrases. But my reactions are too extreme. I can see my part in this. When I did this caused this inside of you, and I'm sorry. Sometimes you need to use phrases to help to get in agreement together. Phrases like, how can I make this better? I see what you're talking about. Let's find some common ground that we can build upon. Wow, I never thought about it that way. I'm thankful and admire that you pointed this out. And sometimes you just need to refocus. And these are kind of like what Dr. Gottman calls repair attempts. All these are kind of try to get back on track. And so refocusing phrases be maybe like, you might be right, but help me understand why this happened. Or we're off track right now. We need to refocus on this. Or we need to take a 20-minute break to just pray. Or let's agree to disagree about this and move on. And then finally, love or thank or admire you for helping me see my part in this challenge or conflict, or helping me see where you're coming from, or helping me understand why. Because remember, this is not your problem. It's our problem. And knowing and valuing each other's God-given personalities, dreams, and differences empowers you to create a shared and meaningful purpose for your marriage. So as I recap these principles, I want you to just pause and just hear, what is God speaking into your thoughts that he's asking you to share? So these principles are honor, knowing, and trusting commitment. Honor your spouse by nurturing fondness, admiration, and turning to each other instead of against each other when challenges happen. And letting the other influence, and let them know that they have influenced your decisions so that they know that you're hearing them. And then know your spouse by learning each other's love maps so that your spouse can trust your decisions are based on your future hopes and dreams together. And that based on your current present circumstances and your future hopes and dreams together, you have made this decision. And then finally, trusting commitment. Trusting commitment to your spouse, and you work together to solve and overcome those solvable challenges, and to work together to create a meaningful mission and purpose for your marriage. So with all this being said, what is God speaking into your thoughts to share, you guys? That was a lot. Dwight?
Yeah, it sort of all boils down to communication and being able to communicate in a loving and caring way. And, you know, the principles that you have put forth is just a way of showing us how to do that. And, you know, you have to take into consideration the other person's feelings, their hopes, their desires, and yours too, and try to, um, I guess, weave them together into a relationship that is nurturing for both of you and everybody else that's around you.
It's good.
So it really is just communicating well.
And sometimes our nonverbals don't line up with what we're saying. And especially if you had a long, stressful day at work, or for me, if I've spent a day doing paperwork, I don't like what's in me, and so I'm very guarded on what I let come out of me, and yeah, and so it's hard, man. Sometimes you don't feel like honoring your spouse because you don't feel honored, you know. So, and I'm not saying your spouse didn't make you feel honored. I'm just saying life that day may not have made you feel honored. That's why Donald has this attitude of I'm too blessed to be stressed. And it is a wall of protection to not, when you let those negative thoughts come in, and it impacts the way that you're able to communicate to people, then it's a tool of the enemy. So, Donald, any thoughts on that?
Oh, brother, this is it's wonderful that you go to the lengths that you do to get all this information for us to help us in our life's walk with each other and our love mates, help mates. But he said everything so simplistic. He said, it's that love thing. He said, love your spouse as Christ loved the church and died for it. And that really wasn't a request. I don't think that was the commandment. If you're going to put yourself in that position, there were times, that Sherry would come in and I'll be out here where I am right now in the floating room, and she needed her time to decompress, and I'd just give her that space, and then she would come out there and say, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm sitting in the chair. You like sitting in the chair? I said, yeah, I like sitting in the chair. Well, you just sit in the chair. And then she'd march off and she'd come back and you still sitting in the chair? And which, she just wanted to get my attention, and she gets it. And with her, it was confrontational. She wanted to actually start a fight, and I wasn't going to participate in the fight. And after a while, she would go off and work out whatever she needed to work out. I was just a punching bag that she wanted to vent on. And then later on, I said, are you doing better now? You told him, yeah. She said, I know that wasn't about you. And I said, yeah, I know. I didn't take it personally. So, it's what we allow to come in that affects us. It's not that we don't love them and they know they're loved, but, Satan's busy trying to destroy love relationships based on his son Jesus, and he's doing everything he can. We can have all the knowledge and technique by other people that like these things, how we're supposed to enjoy each other's lives. I wonder if these people that wrote all that information that you read to us, which is very prudent and important, were they married and how successful their marriages are. It's like a single guy trying to tell a married person, how to navigate their marriage when they're single.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got two different people in the household, and it's and sometimes it's a landmine, and sometimes it's joyous. I'm doing a lot of mumbling, but it's all go back to love. If you can love yourself, as he said, love God with all your mind, your heart, your soul, and your spirit, and love your fellow man. And that means women, men, everybody. As you love yourself, if you know who you are and whose you are, then you got a strong foundation that when these things come against you, you empathize and sympathize, but you don't buy into it. That makes sense?
Yeah. It's when you study this stuff, when you read this stuff, when you get this in your heart and you're like, the good you ought to do, then the poop hits the fan. That's when you're really tested on, do you really believe what you teach? And I tell you, it's difficult because there are times in your life where you're just completely blinded. You're like on cloud 9 and you think, I am the most super awesome husband in the whole entire world. And then your spouse opens you up to, on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being super, 1 being the complete opposite. You're like a 2 today. And you're like, wow, I don't even know that person you were hanging out with, because that's not the person I saw. And you can get very defensive about it, and you can get upset about it, or you can dive in and realize, what did you see? And also realize that the enemy is always at play in your marriage, always at play. Man. And if you don't understand that, you're a fool, because Absolutely. His job is to kill, steal, and destroy relationships. And if you partner with him, you are, as Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. You're being Satan in that moment. You're being the enemy of your marriage. And that is not the way, and it's not the truth, and it doesn't bring life into the marriage. So yes, it's important, you guys. When your spouse hurts you, it's important to say, I feel, but then also you need to add, but this is what I know is real. I know that you're for me, and I know that you're not against me. But look, when you said that, because I care about you, when you said it that way, it made me feel like this, and if you don't do those things, a lot of men, it says majority of all men keep their mouth shut because they're afraid of their wife. 80% of the time, the wife has to bring up the subject. Oh, this is a book also and help understand the of men and women, the difference. It says the essential quality that most women are looking for in men is trustworthiness, which implies accountability, reliability, genuineness, protection, provision. The essential quality that most men are looking for in a woman is to feel desired and wanted by their woman. And they want less conflict and more approval. And the two major complaints that women have about men, I want you to hear them, and I want you to hear the two common complaints that men have about women and see how they're interconnected. Women's two major complaints is that the men are never there for them, and they lack connection and intimacy. The men's two major complaints are too much fighting, not enough sex. And I saw that, and you could see the first part, the men aren't there for us. 80% of all the women have to bring up the marital conflict issue. The men avoid it. And the men say it's just too much fighting. And the women said, they're never there for me. They're never there to help resolve these issues. The women said there's lack of connection and intimacy. The men says there's lack of sex. If you really think about it, what they're saying is communication and physical and emotional connection. They're both wanting the same thing, just looking at it from a different set of coins. And it's just so frustrating at times how our actions are completely miscommunicated to our spouse. And what makes it even worse is that our communication, sometimes since we know what we're trying to communicate in our heart, since we know what we're doing, we think we did a great job. And then you have this second party doing their observation, and they come back with the feedback, which is completely opposite of what you experienced in that moment. And you don't feel admiration, obviously, because the spouse is not admiring you. And yet that's the number one need that a man needs in the relationship. The number one thing that a woman needs is to feel that connection of trustworthiness and genuineness. And when the wife knows that that your goal is to honor your spouse, and that doesn't happen, and she knows that that's what's supposed to happen, oh man, woo. It's difficult, you guys, and it's so easy to let the enemy just say, look, just give up, you're no good at this. And that is not the way. It is not the truth of life. Braz, I don't know if you're on a conference call, if you're able to hear me or not, but I know you're trained as a fighter, and so that's got to be difficult as men. We're all got this perceived concept that we're fighters, and yet at the same time, according to statistics, it's the man that runs away. So, Garrett, do you have any insight you need to share, or anything that God's put on your heart?
No, nothing in particular. I've enjoyed listening this morning.
Well, as the newest member of recently being married, it's probably wise not to communicate yet, huh? At least I get you in trouble.
There you go.
So, Braz, Darren, you got anything that you want to communicate? Well, I'm going to pause the video because to just give it time for us to discuss about things that we just don't want to broadcast to the world. So this is the concept is easy, but the implementation, especially when someone's yelling at you or upset with you, is extremely, extremely difficult. And I have not met someone who is a master in this. So don't feel like you're a failure if you mess up on these things, and just know that you could be the absolute best you and still get crucified. Lord bless you.